Breaking tonight, a bombshell admission about the president's health care law from the president's own Justice Department. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Just last week, as President Obama was claiming that he was sincere but mistaken in his repeated promises that if you liked your health care plan, you could keep it under Obamacare, top attorneys in his Justice Department were telling a federal court something very different. First, here's the president last week.
There is no doubt that the way I put that forward unequivocally ended up not being accurate. It was not because of my intention not to deliver on that commitment and that promise. We put a grandfather clause into the law, but it was insufficient.
Got that? He intended to deliver on his promise with that grandfather clause, but the clause proved insufficient. Moreover, he stressed that the only people affected by that broken promise were those on the small 5% of the public individual market, not those on the much bigger employer-sponsored or group health care plans. As it turns out, as the president was offering those excuses to you, his administration was arguing something very different to a federal court, saying, and I quote, we're going to put the graphic on the screen in a moment, the controller was telling me it has a misspelling, so we're going to get it fixed and put it up. But this is what it says. Even under the grandfathering provision, it is projected that more group health plans will transition to the requirements under the regulations as time goes on. Now, what does that mean? Just look at it for a second. Even under the grandfathering provision, the one that's supposed to save all of you, it is projected that a majority of group health plans, hello, that's employer-based health plan. That's not individual market. A majority of employer-based, essentially, health plans will have lost their grandfather status by the end of 2013. Would you look at the date on that? The date of this memo that the DOJ was arguing this in federal court was October 17th, 2013. This brief was pending and alive, and it still is, as the president was telling you he meant to take care of everyone in the individual market with the grandfathering provision. And by the way, it's only the individual market, and it's not employer-based health care. Got it? The president says X, and the DOJ says not X. So not only now do we have an admission that the president knew this was going to happen, but as for his claims last week and over the past couple of weeks that we're just talking about this puny portion of the market, the individual market, just 5%. Those are the only ones going to lose their health plans. Well, it's not that. You hear it there in the DOJ's brief. Employer-based coverage. Employer-based coverage is also at issue. Remember, President Obama has said over and over again, since this whole thing broke and we saw all these policies getting canceled, he has come out repeatedly to try to urge a belief that this whole debacle only affects a small percentage of the population.
For the vast majority of people who have health insurance that works, you can keep it. For the fewer than 5% of Americans who buy insurance on your own, you will be getting a better deal.
We're talking about 5% of the population who are in what's called the individual market. They're out there buying health insurance on their own. You have an individual market that accounts for about 5% of the population, and our working assumption was, my working assumption was, that the majority of those folks would find better policies at lower costs or the same costs.
Andy McCarthy is a contributing editor at National Review and a former federal prosecutor, and he posted a link to this brief in his column, and it's all here, black and white, what his DOJ was doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, this is part of the fraud. This has been fraudulent from the beginning. This provision itself, the grandfather provision, is just a dog and pony show from the beginning. It's to say that they had a grandfather provision. It was drafted about as narrowly as you can draft it. In fact, the Republicans actually in 2010 tried to turn it into a meaningful safe harbor, and they were voted down by every Democrat.
Every single one.
Including the ones who are now out there crusading that you should get your health care back.
And claiming they were confused by the president. They believed the president, even though it was specifically put in front of them and said, but the president hasn't been truthful, because if you look at these regulations, there really is no meaningful grandfathering, and they said, naysayers. Okay, but put that to the side, because this brief is significant. This is the administration in a dogfight about Obamacare.
Yes, and who's the client, by the way? You mentioned the Justice Department, that's right. The defendant in this case is Kathleen Sebelius's Department of Health and Human Services, the agency or the department that actually administers Obamacare.
So this is all over the
religious liberty mandate, right,
and the contraceptions and so on that religious groups are now going to have to provide to their employees. Right. And so the administration in this case goes in and tells the court. I mean, take the legalese out of it and tell us what. That full screen we had on the board up there, what does it actually say? What
they're basically saying is that we have this grandfather provision. They don't say in there, by the way, that's what the president's relying on to say if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan, period. We have this grandfather provision, but it's fading away. In fact, by the end of 2013, we anticipate that most who were covered by the grandfather provision will lose their coverage.
And they're not just, the shocking thing about this is they're not just saying, and it's only those on the individual market, Judge. I mean, this is in writing saying it is most group health plans.
Megan, that's not only is that true, they cite to a Kaiser study which is about employer health plans. I mean, the whole thing is about employer health plans. They cite to a page in the Federal Register which also is about employer health plans and basically estimates that about 7 out of 10 people on the high-end estimate who have employer health plans, these are the people who get their coverage at work, are going to lose that coverage.
Now, we knew about that piece in the Federal Register. We talked about that a while back because it was shocking when we first saw it about the estimates from the administration on how many people were going to lose their policies or have them changed significantly under Obamacare. But what we have now is the Department of Justice running into court and touting it. Yes. Today, present day, because that regulation was 2010, right after Obamacare was passed. This is present day, them going into court and saying, trust us, Judge, the majority of people who have group health plans are going to be canceled.
That's exactly right.
What does that mean? What does canceled mean in the group healthcare context? It doesn't necessarily mean the same for people who have employer-based insurance as it does for those in the individual market.
Yeah, the word they use is transition. They don't say cancel. They do say lose your coverage, which means that you won't have the same coverage that you have now.
Like, we're not breaking up. We're just transitioning into new relationships that have nothing to do with one another.
Now you're hurting me here. But yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, basically they're taking you from what you have now to something else that they prescribe, which you would never get on your own if you had your own choice.
Right, and it speaks not only to the individual market, but in particular to small businesses and group health care. Andy, the polls show that the majority of the American people do not believe this president, and they believe he's been dishonest, and they believe he's been dishonest specifically about health care. Having reviewed this brief, your last thought.
This is about as insidious as it gets, because the grandfather clause was what he looked everyone in the country in the eye over and said, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. And what this shows is that they never thought the grandfather clause was real in the first place. Mm-hmm.
And the president was out last week saying that it was sincerely held belief. It was sincere, but it was accurate. Query then why the people of the Justice Department just put this in writing. Andy, thank you.
Thank you, Megan.